Hello and welcome to this webinar on the state of safety culture in mining. This is a particularly interesting and important webinar for Sentis because mining sector is actually where Sentis found its origins in supporting organisations to change the lives of individuals and organisations for the better every day. The way we support organisations in achieving their objectives is we provide safety culture services that help get more people home safely. We particularly focus on leadership development, team development, and effective management of serious injury and fatality potential incidents. The information that we're going to cover today is covered off in a resource that will be available in the public arena on the 8th of September. It is the State of Safety Culture Mining Report, where everything we talk about today and a whole lot more is detailed in here. So I encourage you that if you're a mining company seeing this today, it's a great opportunity to go and have a conversation with your leadership team about the findings and the benchmarks provided in this particular report. As you have registered for this particular webinar, you'll get early access to this report and it'll be sent to you. The link to the report will be sent to you directly after this webinar. For those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, my name is Anthony Gibbs and I'm the CEO of Sentis, and I've been responsible for leading Sentis over the last 14 years. I'll be your host for today, and it's my great pleasure now to introduce some fantastic panelists that we've brought along to provide their unique perspectives and expertise on this really valuable bit of insight that we've provided on the report. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Amy Hawkes. She is the head of psychology at Sentis, and Amy is an endorsed organisational psychologist with experience in organisational development, leadership, culture, and wellbeing. She's experienced in both research and consulting, has conducted individual and organisational interventions, large research projects, and has 10 years of academic experience. Amy's really passionate about taking an evidence-based approach to improve workplace, and as a head of psychology, Amy brings best practice insights into organisations to help them improve the actions that they get out of the back of the diagnostic processes they may run. So Amy was one of the key people involved in doing the analysis of this work. Welcome, Amy. Also joining us on the panel today is Anthony Deacon, and he's the director and principal consultant at Glasshouse Consulting. Anthony's someone that we've worked with really closely over the last few years. He's a highly credentialed senior safety operational risk management professional with extensive experience in the mining and other high hazard industries. He's widely regarded as a thought leader in the operationalization of fatal critical risk controls and risk management practices. He was also a contributor to the ICMM Health and Safety Critical Control Management Guide, contributing to a step change in the approach to preventing fatalities in the mining industry. Prior to consulting, he had played a significant role in the Rio Tinto's design and deployment of their critical risk framework, and has had a number of other involvements in top-tier mining organisations. Anthony is passionate about taking a pragmatic approach to ensure that systems and leadership practices support the front line to operate safely and effectively. A very pragmatic panelist and one who will add a lot of value. Welcome. And finally, we have Lee Slump, so the Chief Advisor, Professional Standards for OSIM. So Lee is the Chief Advisor for Professional Standards at OSIM, and he has a background as a senior resource industry leader over the last 23 years. In his current role at OSIM, he's responsible for the industry's work on industrial codes and standards, professional accreditation and registration programs, and policy and advocacy activities. Previously based in London, he's played significant roles in global mining and metals organisations and has chaired the OSIM UK committee. Prior to that, he was a geology manager at Atlas Iron in Western Australia, and also had several leadership roles across a number of big tier mining companies, working at BHP Iron Ore, Greenbushes, and in Kalgoorlie as well. Mr. Slump is a fellow of both the OSIM and the Geological Society of London, and really excited to have Lee on board for this panel, this conversation, as he has such a broad reach and perspective across the mining sector. So Lee, also welcome to you.
Thanks, Ant.
So we're going to unpack a bunch of findings that we have explored across the mining industry, and we're going to look at how it benchmarks across our global client list. but we've put a lot of research, so we've put a lot of research and a lot of context into this, and Amy has been responsible for that analysis. So Amy, as you're the person in the box seat and doing this analysis, I thought I might throw to you to provide a little bit of context so that'll support people understanding the data better.
Yeah, absolutely. And acknowledging the big team of people that sit behind me as well. It's wonderful to have the amount of data that we've got collected across many years and many organizations to begin to unpack some of these insights and be able to share this sort of information is a really great honor and a great experience to be able to do. So we've had over 21,000 mining employees complete our safety climate survey, and over 5,000 of these have been included in our stratified sample for this particular report. So we stratify our data to make sure that no single organisation or industry is overrepresented, which means we can have more confidence when generalising the results. And you can see down the right-hand side of this slide a sense of the demographic information in our report. And the sample here, majority have quite a long tenure in the mining industry, moderate length of time with their current organisation, and you can see there's also a range of people from across positions and various ages in the data as well. So if we just go to the next slide, thanks, Anne. The Safety Climate Survey looks at the perceptions that people hold about the way safety is managed in their organisation, reflecting that underlying safety culture. And so as we run through the data today, you'll see it's grouped into positive, fair, and negative results. So positive perceptions are at the top end of our response scale. So this is sitting in that sort of agree to strongly agree range. Fair perceptions are in that slightly agree range, and negative perceptions are anything less than that. And so we'll see the responses that fall into that negative or fair range are the areas where we're more likely to see poorer safety performance, and we can identify more space for improvement. And throughout the report, you'll also see a comparison to benchmark. So this comparison is also based on a stratified sample, but from a broader range of industries. So to name just a couple quickly is things like agriculture, construction, healthcare, manufacturing, utilities, oil and gas. So we'll be able to compare throughout.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy, for that context. So as we're going to explore, as you will see when you download the report, there's quite a lot of information and quite a lot of detail in the report for you to unpack and explore and compare and reflect on as an organisation. Now, we're not going to be able to cover all that information today, so we're going to focus on some of the key highlights and key conversations that we think it's important for the mining industry as a whole to be having to create a step change in safety performance. We'll kick off by taking a look at where the mining industry performed particularly well, and that is in the area of team support for safety. It's where workers believe that safety is everyone's responsibility. The results also indicate that workers look out for their co-workers' safety and expect each other to always work safely. So Amy, what does this slide tell us, and how does this reflect on reflect on the results of other industries as well?
Yeah, sure. As you said, I think it highlights that strong sense of safety within teams within the mining industry. So we can see that they're significantly above our benchmark there. Still in the fair range, but the fact that people are spending time talking to each other is really positive. And the fact that people believe that safety is everyone's duty to maintain is also a really strong positive result.
Thanks, Amy. And Lee or Anthony, are there any surprises here or any other additional points of interest in the data that you'd like to highlight?
No, I think there's definitely no surprises, and it's been a massive focus of the mining industry, as we know, for the last 10, 15 years to really get that engagement at the coalface, if you like, with the workers. And it's really pleasing to see that that's starting to come through with mining's performance there against the benchmark.
Excellent, thank you, Lee. Well, we might move on to the next element here, which is contractor relations. So as an industry with a large contractor workforce, it's important to consider how safety standards and expectations and experiences align between contractors and employments. Results mostly indicate that the mining industry has a fair relationship overall with contractors. Induction, training and onboarding for contractors in the mining industry received a fair rating overall and tender rate above benchmark. So Lee, we want to talk for a moment about why it's important to look at contractor relationships when we look at overall safety culture of organisations. So what role do you see contractors playing in mines across industry, and why is focusing on contractor relations important in achieving positive safety culture?
Yeah, thanks, Ant. You know, contractors historically have often been sort of cast in that role of the scapegoat. And for me personally, you know, been involved for a long time, particularly around exploration drilling and, you know, a lot of those sort of contractor related, maybe a little bit further away from the visibility of the mine site as well. And, you know, historically, I think, you know, if there were issues within a company's culture or with their systems or processes, the contractors are often sort of seen as a bit of a way to kind of go, well, no, that's their responsibility. You know, we'll move them on, or it's a bit easier to deal with them and cover up some failings potentially within the organisation itself. This definitely improved in, particularly in the more mature mining jurisdictions like Australia and Canada. In my experience, that's really evolved, and you know, contractors are always feeling the heat, right? We're always, you know, talking cost, and then the contractors are the ones that cop it, and they've got to do the most with the minimum. The other interesting thing too is that they're generally the people who are at the front line in the most highest risk roles and doing, you know, really. If you looked at a mining company's safety profile, the contractors are probably sitting there in the highest risk, not because of who they are, but because of what they do. So it's really important to have them engaged right from the start. And I've seen that in my career. It's evolved from, you know, that the contractor, I guess, tender process where there's a big weighting put on price and the I guess the technical aspects, and not so much concern around, you know, what does their safety look like. Whereas now there's equal or greater weighting generally put on a contractor safety management system, how well that can be integrated into a company's safety management system. So it's really important, but fundamentally, you know, they have a massive role to play, because on a mine site, safety culture or culture in general is agnostic to who you work for, right? It's a site-based culture, and to have a positive safety culture, everybody has to be on that same page and believe they're part of the same team and all working towards the same outcomes. In my history, some of the sites that have worked the best are those that have pretty much everything co-badged, right? You know, you've got the principal and the contractor treated almost as an equal, and it's a joint effort on site.
Yeah, greatly. So what I'm hearing there is you must include contractors in your culture strategies if you want to create a positive culture strategy. I'm hearing the payoff for organisations is if you want to be safe and productive, that integration piece is really important. And I heard a couple of tips in there around looking at the way you set up contracts for success, et cetera, et cetera. Amy and Anthony, any other thoughts around some of the major drivers of effective contractor relations?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Anthony. So yeah, look, just to echo everything that Lee has articulated there, particularly around the point that, you know, contractors are often brought in to do higher risk type activities, and they're put under a lot of pressure, etc. So I think the whole piece around, you know, partnering with contractors through a sort of defined strategy of how you're going to go about that is key. I can't help but think about all the narrative at the moment about, we talk about the person isn't the problem to be solved. It might be, you know, they may have the solutions. I think you could probably say the same around contractors. We probably need to stop at looking at them as the problem to be solved, but possibly they may have some of the solutions. You know, often I see, particularly in high hazard type tasks, whether it's, you know, critical lifting activities, for example, the contractor systems are going to be often more mature than the clients, right? They've been brought in for that expertise, and we need to respect that expertise and partner with them. So, you know, it's the other 50% of the conversation, and we know in terms of safety performance, they are the other 50%. So that partnering approach, I think, is core. And I agree with Lee's comments around, you know, it's not an us and them. It's not a blue shirt, orange shirt conversation. How do we work together?
Right.
Yep, 100% agree, and our data totally backs that up in the focus groups and the interviews that we've collected from contractors. Those more positive safety culture environments, the ones where contractors are really treated as part of the organisation rather than a separate group. And there's lots of little ways that can be achieved, as you mentioned, through uniforms, but also where people are eating, where people are working, where people are parking. There's heaps of little ways you can really demonstrate that connection and partnership. And the piece I'd probably add is how are they treated through that incident investigation process? As you both said, they have that really high risk facing work more likely, and so they are potentially more likely to need to report some near misses or some hazards that they've identified, and how's that responded to by the organisation. The quote that's on the slide there, I think, demonstrates the potential negative end that sometimes contractors can face when reporting things, but equally we see really positive responses where that's encouraged, and that's where it aligns with that partnership approach.
Excellent. Yeah, look, I think that alignment, that connection with the contractor workforce and that collaborative approach is really important. I'm getting flashbacks to 14 years ago when I started working in this space, where I went onto a site and went to their canteen, and they had employee prices and they had contractor prices, and it was 50 cents an item difference. Wowzers. So I definitely agree. We've seen some excellent improvements over the last few years, and I think, but obviously, you know, Lee and Anthony and Amy, there's still opportunity to further create that connectedness with a really important, crucial part of business being successful. So thank you for your input there. What we want to have a look at now, draw attention to, is some high-level results about how the mining sector is tracking against benchmark. So what this data tells us is that 88% of mining work sites operate from a negative safety culture versus a benchmark of 86 across broader industry. Underreporting production are usually two of the key indicators of how a culture is performing, and the underlying attitudes and behaviours and the cultural factors that may be at play. It's interesting to see, if you have a look at this information, how age and experience play a significant role in workers' likelihood to underreport or experience production pressure. So you can see those experiences up on the screen there. Lee, I'm going to throw to you first of all here. So as you can see on the screen, our data indicates that production pressure is highest in young workers, those under 30, and underreporting rates are highest amongst those who have worked in the industry between 1 and 10 years. Is this reflective of your experience in your work across different organisations, and why do you think this might be the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen this right across my career, and I think we've made some inroads, but clearly the data shows that it's still a way to go on that front. And I think it comes down to a couple of elements. One is simply that lack of experience, where the younger generation are coming in and they haven't actually been in the environment, they haven't seen incidents. You know, it's a bit like you know, driving a car. You know, the highest proportion of car accidents and deaths are generally young males who are you know, feel that they're invincible. They've never experienced a serious crash or whatever, so that they don't really have the context to go what could go wrong. So that lack of experience is certainly one indicator there. But with the production pressure side of things, you know, it's human nature. We want to be accepted. We want to be seen as a good performer. We want to be, you know, doing all the right things so that the boss, you know, says, oh, look at him go. He's, you know, he's a hard worker. So I think there's still this this view that if I'm sort of stopping things and, you know, spending a bit more time thinking about safety, or if I've had a small incident, you know, I'll be seen as weak, or I'll be seen as someone who's probably causing a bit of trouble if I don't sort of speak up. And it's not until people get a little bit more experience and you can generate that culture, that safe culture where people don't feel like there's any, you know, that it's actually a good thing to report, to speak up, and they understand that, then you know, I think we're still going to have that issue and that struggle. Well, one of the other elements too is, and I mentioned young men in cars, but they probably feel those pressures more than most, and particularly in the mining industry, which has this kind of blokey culture. You know, if you're talking FIFO sites, we know that that's dominated, a male-dominated industry. And this sort of, you know, it almost snowballs this blokey culture of being tougher, who's a harder worker, all of those sorts of things. You know, and when you're in that environment, when you're getting dirty and dusty and you're sort of feeling like you're competing with your workmates as to who's the best, that's a long way away from sitting in an office listening to an induction or reading a procedure, right? And the connections don't necessarily get made. And I think personally, this is one reason why, as we're seeing now, increased push for diversity in the workplace, I think this is going to help. If we can continue that pathway, increase the diversity within the workplace, not just gender diversity, but other, you know, other underrepresented groups, that will bring, I guess, hopefully dilute some of those negative aspects of blokey culture, but still, you know, the positive aspects can still be retained, like those work ethics and, you know, that the sort of hard work. You want them to do the hard work, but you want them to understand the importance of reporting incidents and behaving safely.
That's great, Lee. So I think, so what I'm hearing there is, you know, you've got young males predominantly at the moment coming on site, wanting to impress, full of, you know, full of motivation to potentially get the job done quickly, and that may be having an impact. So one of the strategies you mentioned there is increasing the diversity of workforces. So we're mixing things up, we're providing some different perspectives. Are there any other, and I'll throw this out to the group, are there any other things that you've seen work well that has helped to maybe address some of the issues we're seeing here with young, less experienced workers having more of a propensity to prioritize production over safety?
I could take that one on, Anthony. Give Lee a break for a minute. So firstly, yeah, I mean, I find this question in the survey one of the most fascinating, and it really could almost have a survey to further unpack just this one item. What is driving that? And there's a few things that jump to my mind here. So first of all, you know, when we talk about prioritizing production over safety, and we talk about supervisors and sort of allowing workarounds of safety procedures, the first question to ask is that because the safety procedures, you know, they haven't bought into the safety procedures, the safety procedures aren't working for the workforce, or are they consciously putting their workers at risk, right? So that I think that's an interesting question in itself. And in terms of just the type of people we're talking about here, when we talk about direct frontline supervisors here, I mean, I think it's important to take a moment to picture the sort of people that we're talking about. You know, these may be often, you know, 30-year-old guys and ladies who maybe only weeks or months prior were an operator themselves. So we're talking about people who have been put into leadership roles or frontline leadership roles that are really, really challenging roles. We may not be talking about people that have come out of their corporate office onto the site and said production over safety. We're talking about people who have to make day-to-day decisions at the front line in really challenging situations. You know, you may have a fully loaded coal or iron ore train sitting on the line ready to fill a boat. You know, that we're talking millions of dollars worth of infrastructure tied up, and we have to make decisions. Are we going to clean the coal off the track, or are we going to take hours to isolate the train? So these are difficult decisions. So one of the things that springs to mind, I mean, as you know, I do a lot of work in the area around critical controls. I can't be on the webinar today without mentioning critical controls. But just about the importance of having really clearly defined critical controls with, you know, clear performance criteria, or what in a human performance context we would call stop criteria, where supervisors know they're not just empowered to stop work, they're enabled to stop work by being able to reference the critical controls. So in the example I gave, maybe with isolation, it's so black and white that, you know, it's difficult to see supervisors just routinely authorising bypassing of isolation procedures. But where we've got other safety procedures where, you know, the value of them isn't as direct, or the requirements aren't as clear, I can see supervisors, you know, having workarounds. So the point I'm making is really, I think we need to do more to support frontline leaders by having clear go, no-go criteria in what we do, and, you know, just have the greatest respect for frontline supervisors, because that is a heck of a job to do in a mining context.
Yeah, you paint a really potentially daunting picture there. You know, when you look at that production pressure being 22% over 15, you're right. The frontline leader does play such a significant role in how people experience production pressure. But, you know, have we set that leader up for success? You know, have they got the right experience? Have they got the right training? And do they have the right decision-making framework that sits behind them that enables them to nearly remove their personal perspective from the decision and make it a little bit more black and white? You know, this is the framework. It's clear. We've been consulted on it. We know how to apply it. And that becomes a decision-making framework in which we can determine whether a job needs to be stopped or more, you know, specific action needs to be taken. I think that's great context, Anthony.
I'll just make a comment on that, and we can throw it to Amy. Is I guess it then leads to the next question around, well, we're talking about frontline supervisors, but, you know, what's the role of managers in terms of, you know, what they talk about, what they encourage, what they recognise, how they inquire, all of that comes at the next layer up.
And not to take too much more airtime, give Amy a chance to speak, but I think that point around it is a cultural thing, right? I've in my 23, 25 year career, every single mine site that I've been to or worked at has the big signs, you know, safety first, production will follow, things like that. But when you get to that situation that Anthony was describing around a coal train or an iron ore train waiting somewhere, the people who are the frontline supervisors are sitting there and they have this implied pressure. They go, well, if the company's paying $1 million a day demurrage for this ship, and I make a decision to delay the loading of that ship or the unloading of the train or whatever because it's a marginal thing, then, you know, their default is going to be, I don't want to be responsible for $1 million of demurrage for 24-hour delay or whatever, or we miss the channel. So that's where it's important for managers particularly and leaders, and right, it has to come from the executive all the way down, that there is no question around that, and good to have those processes and systems and very clear definitions, but also that cultural aspect needs to be there where people don't feel that pressure. And you have to recognize that. So as a leader or a manager, you have to go and say, look, we understand that there's big dollars on the line here, but I expect you as a frontline supervisor to make the call on safety based on these parameters, not on the dollar.
Yeah, excellent.
Yep. Yeah. Really, really great. Thanks, Lee. I think Anthony and Lee have done a great job explaining a lot of those big process things and how we can empower our frontline supervisors. I just want to come back to something Lee said earlier about that sort of more blokey kind of culture or approach to work, and how, as Anthony said, those people often move up into that sort of frontline supervisor role. And I think that's where often we get the opportunity to role model things. And so it connects back into that idea of culture and whether or not we allow that sort of behavior to be encouraged and perpetuated, or whether or not we start to look at ways that we can encourage different behavior. So those small moments of change, I think, are also really important, as well as providing the biggest system process to allow people to stop work. But those small moments, those small opportunities for communication, those little jokes that people might have about doing something faster than somebody else, or that's where we can also achieve some change. Cool.
Great. Look, thank you, folks. I'm going to move on to the next question, which I think also talks quite a lot to the types of culture that we create in organisations, and that is this idea of how we approach incident investigations. So it's a pretty significant, it's been identified often as a pretty significant contributor underreporting, our approach to incident investigations. So, and was highlighted as one of the biggest areas of opportunity for the mining sector. And certainly I've had a number of conversations over the years with different levels of miners where it's like, well, I can be doing something safely 99.99% of the time and hear nothing from my leadership team, but something goes wrong, look out, it all goes to pot. So, and the experience that they have in those incident investigation processes, and often unintended by organisations, is often not viewed as a positive one. So, Amy, in your experience, what impact does poor perception of incident investigation process have on safety culture in the workforce?
Yeah, I think your story there captured it really nicely. It's that breakdown of trust and psychological safety that people have, that when they raise an issue, that it's going to be received as something important, worthwhile, something to learn from, versus something that they're going to get blamed for, or there's going to be a negative repercussion. So I think there's a real opportunity to change the way we're responding, so that when people raise issues, they feel safe to do so. And it's really interesting how long these negative stories can exist in an organization too, even if there hasn't been a firing or a really serious kind of negative consequence for the last 7 or 10 years, it still gets talked about. So it is an interesting thing to try and work on for organizations. It's something really worthwhile, because that's your communication process, that opportunity to hear what's going on and potentially achieve some change.
Great, thanks, Amy. And Anthony, have you seen approaches to incident investigations tackled? So have you, we've all probably heard the horror stories of incident investigations gone wrong or not conducted well. Can you walk us through something like a process or incident investigation that you've seen managed well, and what were the key kind of highlights of that experience that made it more effective or more impactful than others?
Yeah, I think, Anthony, there's a real movement in the industry at the moment around, focusing more on learning more broadly, and moving away from the whole working out what the individual did or didn't do in that specific moment. And I think most people on the, well, if not all people on the webinar, have probably now picked up on that message, that we really need to shift towards a learning first mindset. And we hear a lot in the industry around the approaches around learning teams and so forth as techniques to look into a investigation, which I guess now a lot of people are saying we shouldn't move away from the term investigation, because it sounds like we're trying to investigate someone. We need to move beyond that. But I'd like to focus, I guess, more on instead of looking at in a particular incident what the person did or didn't do, or what widget did or didn't work, there's not a heap to learn from that. So we often need to go beyond that and look at, what were the systemic factors, latent factors, organizational factors that led to that scenario arising. And I think often within that is something far more interesting to share. So within the organizations I've been involved with, it might be, they only take, say, one incident each quarter and go really deep into that incident to look at what are the underlying themes around that incident. Did the incident occur due to an issue around risk normalization across the site? And therefore, let's share something around the topic of risk normalization and actually get that as a topic well understood across the site, and ask people to think about, in our work that we do every day, what are the potential risks that we might be normalizing? That type of question might be a far more value-adding question to a work crew than something coming through which is a learning about a specific type of widget that may or may not actually have any relevance to that work crew. So by asking those, darn good questions to the front line around, what risks are we normalizing? Could that happen here? And getting that dialogue going, we may discover things that we never dreamt of, prior. So that concept of looking for underlying themes, sharing underlying themes, asking the work crew their reflections around it is definitely the direction that I would be advocating.
Look, there's a couple of interesting points in what we've sort of shared there, and that is, from what I'm hearing, the mindset in which we approach the incident investigation is really important. Are we going out to nail someone to a pole, or are we going out with a sense of curiosity, with a desire to learn and understand and unpack things? And then that attitude will obviously drive the behaviour and determine the results of that incident investigation. Grant's also indicated here on the chat. He said that he believes that incident reporting is tied to how incident investigations are conducted. And certainly, Amy, we've been able to identify that through our research, haven't we?
Yep, 100%. And I think Grant's right that the way the culture of the organisation treats the gathering and the processing of that information, the sharing of that information, as soon as that is really well articulated and people can see that in practice, that is what's going to happen with that data and that information, then you do improve people's willingness to report. Absolutely.
I think, and if I can just jump in, just a real life example from my side. And I have to probably be a bit careful that I don't disclose too much that I identify the organisation on the site. But not in Australia, in a non-mature mining jurisdiction, and exploration drilling program, quite remote, quite I suppose high risk, and in this instance, those quotes on the screen, incident reporting designed to find fault, not areas of improvement. People aren't owning up to their mistakes for fear of retribution. Also goes back to the comment I made earlier around contractors being held as a scapegoat often, and that's particularly, unfortunately, that's particularly the case in exploration and some of those other elements of the industry. But in this instance, there was a series of incidents across 2 or 3 weeks. One of them was sort of just reported because it was an incident, no impact. 2 of them were first aid / medical treatment type incidents, and they happened across the course of 2 or 3 weeks in this case. And each incident was investigated separately, and the people involved in the investigation were the contractors' safety people and the site's safety people, but very focused on, you know, what were the people doing? You know, why did this person go into this area when he wasn't supposed to? So the initial reactions were, well, you're dismissed and suspended from site for a period of time because you went somewhere that you know, the rules say you're not supposed to go there, or you didn't follow this procedure properly. I got these incident investigations sort of together almost, you know, in this sort of, you know, review by the time it came to me, and I'm having a look, and I'm just seeing some common themes there, and looking at all of those incidents, I went back and I said, look, has anyone actually looked at why we've had a series of incidents that have reasonably similar? They're all slip, trip, fall type incidents. They're reasonably similar, even though the mechanism of each was different. Has anyone looked at that from a broader view and taken that sort of, is there an underlying issue here? And of course, you know, when they did look at that and they went a bit deeper, it was all around the management of the drilling fluids. You know, we know drilling fluids slippery and it's messy, but they weren't being controlled properly and the equipment wasn't being maintained properly. So there was leaks and other bits and pieces. Goes to Anthony's point around normalization of risk in this environment. The guys were all just used to that. You know, the equipment wasn't really working how it should, or they weren't putting in, you know, in place things that could control that fluid or keep it in a different area or away from the people's workspace. That it was just how things were being done. So by seeing the relationship between those incidents, going back, that was ultimately the root cause. And I know we're sort of, many companies are moving away from that root cause analysis type thing into some of these other types of thinking. But ultimately, that was the real reason that these incidents happened, was the poor management of drilling fluids and maintenance of that equipment. And, you know, the first thing I said to the guys was, you can't, you know, bring these guys back on site who have been suspended. You need to bring them back on. You need to recognise the underlying issues, and that culture is only going to exacerbate underreporting or, you know, or no reporting of incidents in those instances.
Yeah. Look, it's such an interconnected piece of the organisation, and I think this is often where the rubber hits the road for individuals and their experience of safety beyond the policies and procedures and what they're taught at different elements of the different stages of the organisation. Pardon me. And it does link closely, I think, to the next area we want to talk about, and that is leadership. So what we would suggest is that leadership impacts on the overarching business culture, and more than any other single factor. And we see that time and time again, where we look at the level of leadership performance, and it correlates. I know it's not causation, but it correlates really closely to the overall organizational culture and performance. So throughout the research phase of this report, there's an obvious divide between senior leadership and workers on the front line when it came to alignment of safety expectations. So as a result, perceptions of senior leaders, as there was a perception that senior leaders are out of touch with the reality and only serve to perpetuate an us versus them mentality of a negative safety culture. So basically they're saying that frontline leaders get it, but the senior leaders, you know, they don't get it. So in this us versus them culture that we're seeing play out, Lee, have you seen this play? Have you seen this play out firsthand? And what do you typically see as the dividers that create an us versus them culture?
Yeah, look, most organisations I've worked for have tried to implement some form of visible felt leadership, right? And that's generally being pushed by the executive and the management. And I would have to say, unfortunately, that I haven't seen it work very well. It's all well and good to say, you know, we want the managers to be out there supporting the frontline supervisors and get into the field, but those sorts of programs, visible felt leadership, however you want to frame it up, they're generally unsuccessful unless a whole of organisation approach is taken to identify those restrictions that are stopping the managers get out to site. I mean, I'm sure there's a few managers out there who will be, comfortable in their head office or whatever and not really want to go to site. But in my experience, most people who have a technical or mine site based background, and me in particular, I love getting out to sites as often as I can, and it's just something about being there. But unless the organisation looks at things like, whether it's excessive administration, inefficient systems that hold managers back from being able to get out into the field, then you're never going to bridge that gap, right? You can say as much as you want, I want the managers out there with the frontline supervisors, but if they've got 1,000 other things on their plate, if the organisation isn't resourced properly, and as I often see at mine sites, if there are inefficient systems for other things, not safety systems, but inefficient systems for many other things, it actually restricts managers from being able to get into the field.
Yeah, it's some really interesting pickups there, Lee, and certainly in our experience, the administration, the burden of a role, is used as one of the reasons why safety leaders, senior managers can't get out in the field. The other thing we hear coming through quite often is that leaders not really understanding the role they have in influencing the jobs on site. I work in, some other corporate services area. How do I impact on safety on the site? Anthony, in your experience, where have you seen an organisation that's done well at bridging the gap between senior management and the front line? And if so, what have they done?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and just to extend on where Lee was talking, I fully agree with Lee. So I'm imagining we've now got a senior leader going into the field, hopefully in their PPE, not in a suit, but they arrive at the job site. So obviously, you said before, they need to be, respectful, curious, authentic, etc. And some of those traits, some of those things may come naturally. One of the things that may not come as naturally is actually knowing what to potentially talk about in terms of the things that matter most, right? So a senior leader, and so I'm going to put myself in this bucket too. I mean, I visit lots of different facilities and lots of different work. Sometimes I may or may not know if I'm looking at. So I would often say even techniques as simple as saying to someone beforehand, possibly a supervisor, when we go to this job site, what am I expecting to see? What are the things that are the pain points for the workers, or the things, the hold points and where they need to get things right? Maybe even get a post-it note and write 2 or 3 key points on that before I go into the field. Again, here there's a connection to, what are the critical risks? What are the critical controls? So if I go to a job site as a senior leader and I start talking about the things that we've agreed as being the critical controls, the things that matter most, I'd like to think that the frontline workers are going to be happy to engage in that conversation, particularly if I'm asking questions around, now that you've told me about that isolation procedure, what do we need to do as an organisation to help you be able to execute that procedure better? Tell me about these monorail cranes. Are there any things that I should be aware of that you've been talking about for years that haven't been addressed? So I think, arming yourself with dot points around the things that matter most is a really good place to start, because often the senior leaders may already have good skills in those other areas. They may just not have the knowledge more technically that a supervisor would naturally have. That's what comes to mind for me, Anthony.
That's excellent. I guess I'm hearing a theme roll through here a little bit in terms of what we would talk about in the work we do at Sentis is having an adult to adult mindset. So expecting that the person that you're dealing with is an adult, an expert, and a professional in their space, and so am I. So if we're seeing someone as not a less than or more than, but an equal in their own way and in their own expertise, and we're approaching conversations and experiences on site with a sense of curiosity and seeking to understand, it creates an entirely different mindset and dynamic for the way those conversations can play out. As a manager or a leader, perhaps we don't need to have all of the answers all of the time. Amy, any additional comments on that?
Well, I reckon that's probably really important, right? We go out if you're a senior leader and you expect that you're supposed to know all of this stuff. And so it's easier to avoid it because you don't know everything that you think you're supposed to know and you don't want people to realize that. So you just don't go. But you're right, if you go in there seeking to understand and recognizing that the people who you're going to talk to are the experts in what they're there to talk to you about, I think you can absolutely gain a lot more out of that. The other interesting thing here is that I think the data also talks to the fact that we don't only want our senior leadership team to go out and talk to every frontline worker. You know, sometimes you just need to improve the relationships and the communication channels both up and down across each level of your leadership team so that each level feels that the level above them genuinely listens and can share that information with the people above, because it's when that information goes up and it gets roadblocked or pushed back down that the message comes, I care, but they don't care. I've tried and nobody's going to help us. But if the information is coming down as seeking to understand, seeking to improve, sharing why something may not be possible right now, but sharing that it is genuinely listened to, then the message comes back down. Okay, you know, what else could we do? What else can we share?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. Look, we're running really tight on time, but there's one final area that I think is really important to spend just a couple of minutes looking at, and that is this area of well-being. So, look, the last 2 years have been really challenging with lots of changes to the way that work is done, and there's been lots of production. There's been lots of pressure on the mining industry to produce more, particularly over this period. So, well-being, and we've seen that this has had an impact on society as a whole, but also people's sense of well-being and general psychological wellness at work. So well-being is a factor that's gained more and more traction and more focus over the last little while. So what we're seeing is a huge movement in the mining sector, which is really positive because we couldn't get anyone to do this module before, but we're seeing more mining organisations than ever looking at the well-being of their workforce. Unfortunately, some of the results we're seeing come through are challenging in terms of how people are experiencing well-being. So Lee, I'm just straight to you. I know this is a real passion area of yours. So is an increased focus on mental health and well-being something that you've seen, like I have, across the mining sector?
Absolutely, and it's been particularly highlighted here in WA in recent times with a huge focus on the issues around the FIFO industry, particularly both from mental health and also the bullying and harassment, which are both intrinsically linked, right? And those stats on the screen at the moment are really disappointing, but they're not surprising at all. And we have to think about the nature of the industry. It is difficult. FIFO work is difficult. You know, people see the dollars and they go, "Yep, I can get out there." But it's long, hard work, days away from your family, days away from your support infrastructure, and not just FIFO workers either. In general, mining is a reasonably tough environment. A lot of companies we're seeing particularly the bigger end of town, are spending a lot of money on that FIFO environment, the camp environment, the mine site environment, and trying to improve that. But ultimately, you know, it's going to be a massive challenge. And particularly, we've made so much progress over the last 10, 15 years on the sort of physical hazards and physical safety. And that came from a point where we were killing far too many people in the mining industry, right? And we recognize that. I say far too many. I mean, anybody is too many. But you see the stats. We had our Mine Safe conference earlier this year, and it was quite alarming to me just to see that we've made this step change in you know, fatalities and serious incident frequency stats, but we kind of hit this plateau, and for the last 5 years it's just plateaued, and we're still, you know, seriously injuring or killing too many people through our industry. And particularly around mental health and well-being, those stats aren't always reflected, right? Because someone could go home, they can be back at home, but feeling all of those pressures of the industry and take their own life or do something. Those stats aren't reflected. So I'm really passionate about this. And at the AusIMM, we've been working recently with the WA government, the DMIRS, the WA department, who the government have recognised this, and they've got a program called Mental Awareness, Respect and Safety, which is being increasingly funded by the government for DMIRS and other industry bodies to focus on this well-being and mental health, and also the sexual harassment, you know, in bullying in the workplace. So we're hoping that over the next few years, we can start to really have a positive impact on that cultural piece. But without a doubt, workplace culture, psychosocial safety are the next massive challenge for the industry right now.
I feel like there's a whole webinar in this space. Amy, any quick thoughts before we start to wrap things up?
Just 100% agree with Lee. I think it's really well said.
Yeah, all right. Might be a topic for a deeper dive at a later time. So look, folks, we are getting towards the end of the webinar. If there's any questions that anyone would like any of us to answer, we're probably not going to have time in the webinar, but feel free to put them in the chat and we'll endeavour to get back to you on those at a later date. If you'd like more information, so if you'd like to take a deep dive into this report, maybe spend a bit more time chatting to Amy or one of the team on the findings of the report and some of the things that we've discussed today, we're going to put a quick poll up on the screen. Simply click yes, and we'll be more than happy to take some time to link in with you and talk you through some of the greater detail that sits behind the report. It is a really powerful resource to have a conversation across industry. We did another one for the utility sector last year, and we found that conversation made its way into a lot of boardrooms. So do encourage you to take this and take a further look at it. We have 4 days until our first ever safety leadership masterclass. So the aim of it is to give you, to a certain extent, self-guided learning throughout that period to be able to look at, well, how do I promote change within my own organization? It's also a cracking networking experience. We've got safety leaders from all across the globe. I think 8 different countries are currently recognized within this group. And all those people are going to be coming together and having the opportunity to brainstorm, solve problems, and learn from one another within this environment. So if you are interested in engaging in this particular activity, I'll ask Cassie to put up a final poll, and we'll get in touch with you about that. So 4 days until that starts. Folks, our webinar is drawing to a conclusion. I know everyone's got very tight schedules and is really busy. I'd like to thank Amy, Lee, and Anthony for joining me today. The content of your responses and commentary to this information has been really rich, and I feel like we probably could have easily added another hour onto the conversation. So hopefully get you all back in again soon to have a more detailed conversation. So thanks again.
No worries. Thanks, Ant.
Great, and thank you everyone who's invested their time and energy into this really important topic. Have a safe rest of the week and a good weekend. All the best.